I'm here with Christopher Jackson. Christopher, what is your role at Creatio?
I lead the financial services strategy at Creatio. So I work with credit unions, different financial services companies to really help them realize the value of Creatio, which is an AI native business process manager with a focus on CRM and of course different AI agents. So really kind of the entire, member life cycle is where we focus. So putting that together, doing workshops, business cases, making sure that we're looking at the right areas to focus on is really kind of my day to day at Creatio. And then, of course, working internally and with our partners to make sure that we have the right grasp on what credit unions need, what's needed in the market, and kind of where it's going in the future.
I, I know Creatio has been around for a bit. Is financial services relatively new for Creatio, or is it a newer focus? What has historically been Creatio's bread and butter?
So Creatio actually started as a business process manager. So it goes back to, workflows and process automation. I wouldn't call financial services a new focus, but it is certainly one of, if not our strongest focus. It is the largest part of our business. So obviously we do have a strong focus there on, development and enhancements. But over time, it's gone from, a business process manager to, becoming AI native and really just focusing on different industries. We've done that, the sales and the marketing and the service aspect of that, relatively well, of course. And then now we want to focus on, on the differences and the nuances between different industries. So I think in the past few years, we have been differentiating between something like financial services and manufacturing and public sector, different things like that, just to make sure that we are addressing and, accurately defining what needs to happen with the product and what's valuable in the market.
So knowing that Creatio has its pedigree in business process management and that space, would it be fair to say that Creatio, its strengths is in the service side of the application of CRM over some of the marketing automation and sales automation?
I certainly would say that, and I think it goes back to just like you said, the business process management, because service cases ultimately, however many there could be 10,000 of them, but many of them are just processes. They are, hey, we need to do this, and that, depending on what the actual request is. So I think it's a good way to look at it, and it's been one of the biggest value drivers for credit unions when we start looking at, hey, what can our call center do with this, or what can the service center do with this? What can our employees? How can Creatio help them to put into place these different workflows and the automation within those workflows, whether that is process automation or getting into AI and AI agents, all of that type of stuff plays into how do we serve our members as opposed to just looking at it from a sales or marketing perspective. Of course, that is part of it. I think that when we talk about serving our members, those two things do play into it. It's not hey, we're just fielding a request for a new debit card. I think when we talk about serving our members, to me, that is, if there's an offer there, we should be, telling them about it. If they have interest in something for different consultation or sales processes, that is part of serving the membership. So I think that a lot of that plays into it. But at the same time, I think that those processes that we're doing on a day-to-day basis is very important to keep track of.
So speaking about, Creatio specifically, who would you say is an ideal cohort in the credit union movement in terms of maybe asset size? And I hate using that as a yardstick for, comparing each other against each other. I know billion-dollar credit unions that are operating like they're $200 million credit unions. So it's very hard to find a single metric to use to measure ourselves against each other, but it is what it is. So with that caveat, is there a particular credit union asset size that you feel is in that sweet spot, has, the capital to invest, has the staff to help manage and sort of has that operational efficiency mindset to wrap a very BPM heavy CRM solution to deploy that at their credit union? Where do you see that? Is a $50 million credit union knocking on your door saying, hey, we want BPM, or is your typical client in the 1 billion plus range?
I think it dips a little bit lower than 1 billion. I think that somewhere around about 500 million is kind of usually the starting point that we typically see, and maybe a little bit lower every now and then, and then all the way up to 20 billion or 50 billion. We have credit unions and other financial services organizations that are much more than that as well. So I don't think that there's a specific institution or asset size that either does or does not need or can't or can or cannot use Creatio as a platform. I think that what we're seeing now is that people within that 1 billion to 10 billion or 1 billion to maybe 20 billion range are really trying to, especially on the credit union side, are really trying to catch up with some of the larger banks that have a little bit more, that have more resources, that have the ability or have had the ability in the past to invest a little bit more into certain technologies that may have in the past been deemed as not necessary, let's say. I think it goes from, yeah, we used to think that all we need is a core banking system. And then you add on, an LOS, then you add on your digital banking. So there's always these different pieces being added. And I think CRM and these business process or orchestration, platforms, they are becoming foundational to the technology, they're the infrastructure of an organization like that because of, the siloed data and the different things like that. So the more systems you add, the more difficult it is to connect. So I think having that, one, kind of place of orchestration is valuable. So I think that back to your original question, that asset range is typically playing a little bit of catch up at this point. But I think that they are starting to recognize the value above and beyond automation. It's not just about automating different processes either. I know we say that a good bit when we talk about workflows and things, but at the same time, I think it's very important to remember that it's more about putting that member profile together and understanding these different things. So that's typically where I'm seeing the most interest.
I'm glad you mentioned orchestration. That came up on our last call, and I think it's one of those new buzzwords. And those of us that have sort of been in the industry for a while, certainly those of us that are in the sort of tech area, understand what that looks like. But with all of the AI stuff that's out in the atmosphere, orchestration layer has become a new thing, and it's a new popular thing, which I think helps folks like us when we have these. Everybody used to double down on RPA, and RPA was the new thing, and you got to do RPA. You do BPM and then you do RPA. Now it's about the orchestration layer, the ability to take agentic solutions and do some of the orchestration, make them conductors, create agents that'll be able to do things for you. I think it's so important to think about the CRM as sort of the facilitator of that orchestration layer. So we talked about Creatio, the genesis or the pedigree of Creatio being in the BPM area. How does Creatio handle marketing automation and managing sales pipelines? I see CRM as kind of a three-headed hydra a little bit. You've got marketing automation, you've got business development, sales, and then you've got service. How do you feel that breaks out percentage-wise in terms of strength? Are you 60% strong in the sales area and the remaining two heads get 20% apiece? Where do you feel like Creatio falls in that? Are you a perfect 33 and a third across the board?
I don't know if it's exactly, a third across the board. I would say that it leans a little bit more heavily just because of the roots as a business process manager that we talked about. I think that service is certainly somewhere that is a little bit more prominent. It also has a little bit, typically it has a little bit higher ROI also because you can do two things at once, right? You've got your productivity gains, but it also can help you to surface, it's going to help with customer or member satisfaction, different things like that. So I think service is probably, I would say it's 40% maybe, and then sales at 30
mm-hmm.
and marketing at 30. So I hope I did the math right, but
No, I'm doing the math in my brain too.
So yeah, I was trying to do that while I was talking, but no, so I think that they're all important. And one way that I think about this, and it's one of the workshops actually that I typically do with credit unions, is that Creatio is composable. So you have the option of just getting a marketing module. You have the option of just getting sales or just getting service. But when I look at this, all of these things are interconnected because let's say that we run a campaign, which you can obviously do using, the marketing module. You can segment your audience. You can segment your member base based on, what kind of campaign you're running. You can set up outreach programs. You can track the results of those. But once you run a campaign, where did those I guess where does the interest go, right? It needs to go into something. It can't just say, okay, they're interested, and then we have to, leave the platform. How are we going to follow up? How are we going to, to act on that interest? So that runs into your different sales processes. And I know that um, credit unions, really a lot of financial services institutions, they don't like the word sales, and I don't. So I kind of typically call it something like a consultation because that's ultimately what it is. I think it has quite a bit of sales similarities because ultimately it is. If someone is interested in something that we have, then we want to talk them through it. But it's more of a consultative approach, especially with credit unions, because of the member aspect of that, the personal relationships that we're building. So I think that consultation is a little bit of a better word in my mind. So maybe an MSR picks that up and they act on that lead. So they want to follow up and say, "Hey, member, you know what? You had interest in this. Let's talk about it. So let's see if we want to move forward with this. Let's see if this is the best option for you, right? There may be another, based on their profile, based on their portfolio, whatever it may be, there may be another option that fits them a little bit better. So I think that to me is part of the sales process, and it rolls directly from something like a campaign that may be very, very tailored to the member base through into your sales and your consultation processes, and then all the way through to service. So once book that product, whether it's a an account or a loan, whatever it may be, a service, then they may need help with that down the line. So we need to know, okay, have they had this for 6 months? Have they had this for 5 years? That's a big difference. If they have a problem with something in the first month of booking it, then that's probably not the best member experience. So it's I mean it goes all the way through, and then ultimately when we get to service, I mean that rolls back into our marketing campaigns. Let's say that, for example, someone has put in 6 different service cases in the last 2 months. We may not want to include them in a marketing campaign. It's probably not the right time. So it may
Absolutely.
rub them the wrong way, and that's a bad member experience. So to me, all of these things are interconnected, and I think that they should have they warrant the same, as much focus as each other, depending on kind of where your goals as an organization are. But ultimately, I think service is the strongest focus, and then sales and marketing are both obviously there as well.
Yeah, so you touched on the service sort of informing what happens on the sales and marketing side, and I think that's such a great point. And I think I would say that is a potential differentiator that, in my mind, kind of is a very important piece because the old adage that it's easier to retain an existing member than it is to go out and get one is so true. So if you have the opportunity to really excel in the service area and make sure your left hand knows what your right hand is doing, you don't want negative service experiences. I mean, even from the credit union perspective, you don't want those members that have had a negative experience impacting your marketing efforts. You certainly don't want to send them a survey out after they've just submitted 6 service cases. So, selfishly, that's definitely an area that a credit union should be aware of and should factor into making some of these decisions. I absolutely think that even in today's world, I think is so important because we just have to hang on to these members for dear life because there's so many competitors out there that are way more efficient, have way more capital to invest in leading edge and bleeding edge technologies and systems. And so whatever we can do to make the service experience as efficient and as frictionless as possible, that's a win in my book. To your point about credit union and folks sort of recoiling at the idea of being salespeople, I 100% agree. I'm on my third credit union in almost 30 years, and I can tell you every credit union that I've been at, that's always been a challenge. We're not salespeople, and I like the way you frame it. We choose a very similar way to approach it at First Advantage. We call our member service reps trusted advisors. So it would be accurate to call them trusted salespeople, but to your point, we don't really want to frame it that way. So one of my favorite movies is Glengarry Glen Ross, and There's that famous scene with Alec Baldwin and talking about the leads and the sales contest, and it just gives you just a very just guttural, greasy reaction, and it's just so salesy, and I love it. But at the same time, you want to be able to give the member service reps, the trusted advisors, the good leads. You want to give them the information that they can use in a human way to provide that consultative advisory sort of services and not make it a smarmy sales pitch. I think you can live in both worlds. The way that I look at technology in general is as an enabler of the things that we do as humans better than computers do. So we emote, we have that EQ, we have that ability to empathize and have these one-on-one conversations with members. And how great is it to be able to also bring in some intelligence in a non-creepy, non-Amazon, Instagram feed sort of way, so that they can provide the right service at the right time to the right member at the right point in their lives. So I think that's a huge win, and I think it's something that's often overlooked. I think a lot of times, and this is something I want kind of your feedback on, is do you find a lot of credit unions engage and decide to go down this CRM path based on marketing automation or business development, and really kind of put service to the side a little bit? Are you seeing that? Because that's what I've seen a lot. The business development piece and the marketing automation usually takes the lead. And I'm wondering, especially from an organization that's grown up as a BPM centric organization, are you seeing the same thing?
I have actually. It's a good point, and it's kind of it kind of surprises me sometimes when we'll be engaging with a credit union and we're talking about these different things, and then ultimately we get to the point and we say, well, how do we forget about service? We should talk about that as well. We should talk about the call center. We should talk about how are we servicing the members? Are you using something like whatever Ring Central? Like what type of case management are we doing? And then they say, well, we don't really have anything, or they have something that they don't like. And it's always surprising that that was not the reason that we were in the conversation in the first place, because I think it is forgotten about, or kind of maybe takes a back seat to some of those things that they may have heard that they should be doing, as opposed to what they really would like to do. So I think it's a good point that a focus should absolutely be on service and case management, because ultimately that's where you interact with members most. I mean, that's where your member base is going to show up. And I know that gaining new members is obviously important. So when we look at business development side, you don't want to forget about that either. But if you have 250,000 members, then they're going to need things on a day-to-day basis. So I think it's certainly it should be a primary focus when talking to someone like Creatio. We should absolutely have that conversation in the first discussion. Is that how are we working with servicing, and what are we doing with case management? How can it be better? Because ultimately there's lots of different options out there to increase that member satisfaction. And I saw something recently. I don't want to misquote this, but or misattribute this, but from one of the main analysts that said that people that focus on the member experience, that are continuously updating that and keeping tabs on that and making sure that, hey, what is the member sentiment? Are we providing first contact resolutions, et cetera, et cetera. They have 25 to 40% higher customer or member satisfaction, and I think that's like a CSAT score. So I think it's telling of the impact that case management and servicing can have on your current members, and the sentiment that they have.
I so it's funny. We're probably talking about two different studies, but this was for probably 5 or 6 years ago. But Dell Computer did a survey of incoming calls to their support center, and they tracked hold time against first call resolution, and then compared the customer satisfaction scores after the call. And they saw a huge correlation in the satisfaction scores going up on first call resolution, irrespective of the amount of time that they were on hold. So those support customers were willing to sit on hold for 40 minutes, as long as at the end of that 40 minutes, first call resolution, and they didn't have to call back. But if you give them a 20-minute hold time and then they get on a call with somebody, they get transferred again, and somebody has to follow up with them, the scores drop precipitously. So there's a ton of value in measuring first call resolution, and it's I'm starting to see a lot of information about I'm in the same boat as you. I can't remember exactly who. So this is information that we can certainly put in the show notes just so people can go out and do the research on their own. But recently, and I think it was Cornerstone, but it could have been somebody else, had shared that the customer satisfaction scores for banks are starting for the first time outperform credit unions, and that it was always our bread and butter. We provide knockout service. But that was before SoFi, that was before Chime, that was before Kraken and Klarna and all of these other fintech competitors that are just taking our lunch because they're so hyper optimized and hyper efficient, and their automation systems are light years ahead of where most credit unions are at. So you can't just sit back and rely on the fact that you're a credit union and you offer knock 'em out service. It just doesn't work anymore. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And
that's
I'd give one more kind of analogy on that too, because I think something you said reminded me of a talk that I heard a few years ago. And it was about, like you said, it's because we're not always going to have a first contact resolution.
Mhm.
A lot of times you may have to go through certain stages or certain people. But the example they gave was Disney, and they called in for something about Disney. Maybe they were going on a trip there, and they said they had to talk to 3 or 4 different people. But when they would transfer that phone call, the next person knew what the call was about. They knew what the context was. They knew what the problem was. They knew what the previous person could not do. And then so the continuity of that communication was kept throughout, that whole, interaction. And they said that made the biggest difference in actually getting to a resolution, is that they didn't have to explain that problem every single time. So I think that's another place that having that centralized view of a member, when they call in, we can say, hey, what was the communication history? Whether you're using an AI agent to, surface that quickly, or whether you are, just looking at your 360 page, whatever it might be, that you're still getting that context and saying, hey, they just talked to them about whatever the issue was. So I have a little bit more context. Hey, are you calling about this? Or, it can be a good thing too, is that, hey, we saw that you have an outstanding, marketing, offer. Is this what you're calling about? So different things like that, being able to quickly view those insights from multiple different areas of the business and multiple different data sources, I think can be, it just, I mean, that's something that I always like too. Whenever you're calling in somewhere, you don't want to have to explain yourself, 5 or 6
absolutely.
times to get
Yep.
someone.
And as a consumer, that drives me nuts. I hate that more than anything. To have to explain my story 4 or 5 times, between 4 or 5 different phone calls, even if it's on the same phone call, it's still
Exactly.
annoying. And it just, and even from a business perspective, how long is that member on the phone with 4 or 5 different reps from the organization? If you could shave, 10 minutes off of that, that's 10 minutes that I can spend being a trusted advisor, or
Exactly.
moving on to the next service opportunity, or making an outbound call, or there's way better options there. So that's great stuff. I'm curious about what you've seen in your interactions with credit unions. One of the challenges that I think, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the challenges that I see is access to some of the data. Credit unions, I think a lot of them, and I think this is less of an issue at some of the larger credit unions, because I think they've already dipped their toes in data lakes and data warehouses, and they've got some sort of data layer, or at least access to data. And I think they may be a little bit better prepared than some of the smaller credit unions are. But I'm curious, knowing as much as I do about some of the cores and some of the challenges with getting core data and some of the ancillary products and getting access to some of their data, what's your experience been in tackling those challenges with credit unions and going back to these service providers to get the data that really underpins everything that we're trying to do here?
Yeah. I mean, it is a challenge, because at a certain point we are, limited by what, let's go to core banking systems as an example. We're limited by what they will give us. If there is no access to certain pieces of data, then how are we supposed to get that? So I think it's kind of a two-part question there. And one of the most important steps in implementation is the data mapping, because we need to understand what is coming over, when it's coming over. Is it a batch process? Is it real time? Do we really need this right now? So being able to understand what does the MVP look like? Where do we start? And what do we have access to? Because ultimately you may have to go back and forth with the core to figure out how do we get access to this, because ultimately we need it. I think that they're getting better about this. I think some of the newer cores they're understanding that the core is not the end all be all, the only system, in a financial services organization. I think that a lot, going back probably quite a while now, they may have been the only system in there. They are the system of record. So it is obviously very, very important, but that doesn't mean that they're the only one. So I think the newer ones are taking the approach that, hey, yes, we may be a foundational system that is tracking everything, and that we are the system of record, but they're understanding that we need to play well with other financial technology too, because ultimately, if we don't have the option or the capability, or we just won't provide that information to people, then they're going to leave it. They're going to find one that will allow that access, because it's limiting the credit union from serving their members. I mean, ultimately, if you can only do certain things in core, that information lives there and dies there, then there's got to be a better experience. So it limits your access to other systems, it limits the benefits of other systems when they hold that data hostage. So I think that they are moving towards a more open approach. I mean, everyone speaks, the same, they follow the same protocols now. So it's not about how we're passing the data. It's what data are we passing? What do we have access to? And when is it being, when is it being passed? Is it being passed in a timely manner? Do we need this? If someone calls in to check their balance, it needs to be live. It needs to be real time. We can't do an overnight thing, because they may have gone to spend a bunch of money that morning. So it's one of those that it's important to map the data properly first, to understand what is prioritized, what is real time versus batch, like I said, and so on and so forth. So I think that's where I see the biggest, I wouldn't call it a challenge necessarily. I think that's the biggest lift in the whole kind of piece. But ultimately, you're working towards an effective data transition. So that's something that I typically see, and it's something that sometimes adds to the timelines, is when we don't map out properly to begin with, then you can experience delays in implementation, because then we have to go back and figure out, okay, well, wait, we don't have this information. How are we going to do this process? So
Mhm.
something like that.
I over my years, I've seen, I think the core providers at the very least are starting to understand that a little bit more. A lot of the core providers have, and I hate to use the same terminology as what you're using. I almost feel like it's an insult, but they have their own baked in CRM-ish tools. And to say they're middling at best is being charitable. And I, to credit unions' credit, they've made do with that for decades. But to the earlier point, that you have these things need to be aware of what's happening across the credit union, and a bolt-on, feature inside of a monolithic core stack is just not going to cut it anymore, because there's so many things going on outside of the core. I think the vendors like LOS and collections and phone systems and stuff, those vendors I think are probably a little bit easier to work with, because they already have to, by design, they have to live in the world where they're already outside of the core, they're already outside of that data. So they've solved for a lot of that early on, because they need to, otherwise they're not going to be able to deliver. Exactly. So they've got a leg up, and I think some of the core vendors are starting to learn that lesson. I Knowing that there are new entrants out there that are cloud first, API enabled, composable, all those really terms that if I was looking for a core product today would be at the top of my list. They're learning that is becoming more and more important over the last 5 or 10 years, but they're slow to market with a lot of this stuff, and some of them still are just fighting tooth and nail. And I know for a fact that a lot of them still pitch their horrendous CRM platform to credit unions when they are considering those cores. And I think that does them a disservice because it's putting them in a position of being able to offer what is probably a decent core. But when you start bolting on these legacy, outdated, unintegrated, non-agentic, all those buzzwords, when you bolt that on top of the core, it just weighs it down and you end up with this boat anchor. So I would agree. I think we're kind of in a renaissance here a little bit, and I think AI certainly is going to help move this forward. If you're not in some way, shape, or form mentioning AI on your investor calls or investor days, your stock's you're gonna take a hit if it hasn't already. So they're going to need to figure out a way to exist in the world where there are competitors now that are that is for them, the way they grew up and the way that they're built. In the same way that SoFi is super hyper optimized for efficiency, they were just built that way. We were built on spreadsheets and general ledgers. So it's hard to compete in that world when you're, to go back to one of the things we said right from the beginning about Creatio being a BPM focused, BPM pedigree company, and maybe having that 60% split on the service side. It's not to say that you're not driving a Porsche. You are. It's a great product and it's a strong product, but it's probably not the right product if your focus is on marketing automation and sales. Because then you're getting a good 20%, and it's just not fit for purpose. So, I your perspective, absolutely, as the representative for Creatio, I like your split. I think it's a good split. But if I'm all about just sending out marketing promos, I'm probably looking elsewhere, and it's probably better that I do, because why wouldn't you just use Constant Contact or something like that? Because for my organization, if that's all I'm willing to move forward with, if I'm not interested in service, if I'm not interested in workflow, probably not going to make sense. So I'm going to buy the pickup truck to tow my trailer. I'm not going to buy my Porsche to tow the trailer. That'd be silly. But they're both good vehicles.
It would be fun to see, though.
Absolutely. Yep. I'm sure somebody's got a Taken or something like that they're going to, strap an car to the back of a dump trailer or something like that. I would love to see that on Instagram. So let's talk a little bit more about your experience coming into credit unions. And I think we covered the credit union market pretty well and some of the challenges. I want to talk a little bit about sort of the sales cycle. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on, the back and forth, but I think one area that I think is worth talking about is, are credit unions prepared? We talked early on about making sure that you're thinking about sales and you're thinking about service and you're thinking about marketing automation. And we covered data. We know data is important and it's underpinning a lot of this stuff. Do you find that you have to sort of encourage your prospective clients to do that kind of deep dive into what their current state is so that they can, I don't know, start the journey and have a good footing on the path to success along the way? Or do you feel like credit unions that are coming to you specifically are already ready and it's just a matter of getting the shovel in the ground and getting started? Where do you sort of see that today?
I think there's both. I think that a lot of times when we start to engage with credit unions, there's an interest or there's a curiosity about, hey, we heard this, or hey, we need to do this. We kind of know. What I don't think is a common knowledge is the breadth of what is possible. So when we start to look at, like you said earlier, I think a lot of times somebody will come in and say, we need a marketing solution, but they don't know that they also have the ability to use something like Creatio for sales and for, consultations and for service as well. So that's, doing that current state activity workshop. That's actually something that I do very often with credit unions, is basically look at, hey, what are you doing today? Where are the pain points today? And kind of digging into that, because a lot of times you'll find that in some organizations, maybe the marketing team doesn't know that the MSRs have or don't have visibility into this, and it's a simple fix. Sometimes it's not, or sometimes it's a wish list item, or that the call center doesn't have this information, or if we did one thing better, then this would make someone's lives easier. So I think going through that current state is extremely important, because it opens up areas that we really need to focus. So that's typically where I start with some of the workshops that I do, is let's walk through what you're doing. Then we look at, okay, here's how, Creatio fits into these things. So let's talk through, the full process and make it and turn this into a future state. Let's look at where you want to improve. Where are those pain points that we can address and make this better? And maybe there's not any pain points in something like marketing, but there are in a branch, in the branch operation, something like that you wouldn't really know unless you start to dig into the actual day to day and the actual processes that are happening, instead of just looking at it as, hey, we're just going to get another technology that does these 5 bullet points. So I think putting it into perspective of this is going to be a part of our day to day lives in our jobs is extremely important. And to that point, now AI obviously is everywhere, and it's always good to look at a future process as if you are redoing it. That doesn't mean that you're doing everything wrong, and that it doesn't mean that you're going to transform everything, but we have to look at it as a new process. Otherwise, we're just going to be putting AI on top of a process that's already potentially broken, or that's not as, it's not best practice, whatever it might be. We don't want to just drop AI on top of it. You want to build a process that includes AI where you need it, or includes these different capabilities of, a CRM as you go. So it's not that we are reinventing the wheel necessarily. It's that we are, redesigning it, let's say,
Yep.
to work a
You're
little bit better.
optimizing it. I was on a podcast recently, and I don't know if you're familiar with I Love Lucy, the old sitcom, but there's an episode where Lucy and Ethel are working in a chocolate factory, and there's an assembly line that comes by, and there's chocolates, and they have to take it to chocolate and wrap it and put it back on the assembly line, and it goes into another room. So the point that I made is, could we replace Lucy with a robot? Yes, we absolutely could. So we have a robot with, let's say, just say 3 fingers, and it picks up the chocolate, and it's got another hand that wraps it and puts it down. So will that be faster? Yeah. So the robot will just do this faster than Lucy can. Lucy's stuffing the chocolates in her shirt and her hat, and they're eating them. So the robot can do that, but you're still basing it on the human process that was designed, in this case, in the 1950s. So does that make sense? Is that the right way to apply that technology? It's not. If you look at Hershey's, or you look at a major chocolate manufacturer, they have these massive machines that drop thousands of pieces of chocolate right into a wrapper, and they heat transfer, and done. And so here's 10,000 pieces of chocolate that's done in a matter of seconds. If you use the robot, you got the robot's going to get arthritis in its elbow, and you got to replace the fingers, and they wear out, and all that kind of stuff. So that whenever somebody talks about AI and applying technology, I always say, go back to the process. And for Creatio, this is where you guys were raised, in business process automation. Don't improve a process that shouldn't exist. Instead of doing the individual finger thing, let's make 10,000 pieces of candy at once, and ship them right out the door. So I 100% agree with you. I think it is so important to really look at the processes before you apply technology, automation, RPA, AI, or even CRM. I think those 2 things really kind of go together. And I always see the process improvement piece as foundational to any effort that certainly touches members, touches data, touches any of that stuff. And if you don't, you're going to end up with a robotic Lucy that's just, that's breaking all the time because you're wearing the stupid thing out. So
Yeah, I mean, and to that point, it's the robot would probably eat less of the chocolates, which is, but I mean, so maybe that's a good thing. So you're cutting down on,
yep,
unnecessary activities. That's
a little less waste.
Yeah, less waste. I didn't want to frame it that way, but yes, absolutely. But at the same time, I mean, there are certain things that AI is not built to do. That's the way that we typically look at it, is that humans are, built to for lack of a better word to say, to do certain things. They're better at certain things. So if you're doing something like a taste test with chocolates, robot's not going to be able to do that.
Absolutely.
It's not going to be able to taste that one of these is off, whatever it might be, but a human can. So when it comes to having conversations with members, or tough conversations sometimes, or helping them to kind of reading into the nuance of a situation,
Hmm.
that's something that humans should absolutely be a part of. And I know that automation is through the roof now, whether that's, RPA or whether that's AI, and we have what we call autonomous agents. And that's to me a little bit misleading sometimes, because a, the vast majority of times there's still a human in the loop, and you still want them to be in the loop, because hey, we need that actual, I always find myself saying a second set of eyes, but it's really a first set of human
Or,
eyes
yep.
on some of these processes, just to make sure, hey, this is doing it the right way.
Hmm.
It is some of these things are sensitive conversations, but there are other processes that are lower stakes, let's say, that
Hmm.
that are really the bread and butter of something like an AI agent, or you know an automated process. So I think there's finding, when you go to redesign some of those processes, it's pretty obvious which ones you are a little bit less, or you're a little bit more hesitant to automate the full thing. That's where you want a human in the loop. And that's totally fine. If you're still improving that process using the capabilities, the new technology that you have, but you're also keeping that personalization, you're keeping that human there in case, so that we can treat the process with the respect it deserves.
Absolutely. I love that you said human in the loop there. One of the things that I hear a lot whenever the subject of CRM is brought up, a lot of people instantly think about the big fish in the pond, the big whale, and the amount of human resources required to support a massive, massive, you almost need a force of people to support some of those products. So that is always a concern. And a lot of times I've run into executives that do that calculus in their head instantly. They think, all right, I need a team of 5 people to support this massive deployment of this super complex CRM product that's going to require us partnering with a third party that's got a fleet of developers that are specialized in how to live in this world, and everything is going to be about this particular product or service. So the cost benefit analysis is instantly done, and nobody likes CRM, nobody wants to do it. So I know Creatio, one of the things that you are pushing, or one of the things that's kind of foundational to your product, is the low code no code approach. And I know there are a lot of vendors out there doing similar things, and I'm curious, how should credit unions approach the idea of getting into low code no code with something that is handling a lot of member data, that is going to be in front of all of the colleagues. We call our employees colleagues. That's going to be in front of the colleagues, and potentially in some cases, depending on how you deploy this, may even be in front of members. So how do you weigh the risks associated with that against the idea that it may be one of the reasons why you're there in the first place? Because the idea is now you don't need to have a fleet of developers ready to customize and deploy these agents or tools or workflows inside of your product. So how do you weigh that, and how do you have that communication with credit unions early on?
I think that's one of the main, it's one of the biggest values that we can provide, is enabling business users and subject matter experts to essentially build the system in a way that works for them. It's because, of course, we have out of the box credit union workflows, and that's totally fine, but that may not fit every credit union. It may not fit with the way that you're doing business. So in traditional, back in whatever a few years ago, that with when you didn't have no code options, you're going and getting in, putting it on a roadmap with an IT team, or playing the telephone game, which is even worse. To me, that's a bigger problem, is that you're not just waiting on a fix, or a enhancement or a change to the systems that you have to use every day. You're
Hmm.
not just waiting on it, is that they don't understand what you're asking for. So then you end up with a different incorrect process or function of the system, and it just kind of snowballs, because then you lose adoption, you lose users, because they're like, hey, this isn't working for me, this is not what I want. So it's adding no value. So
Hmm.
I think one of the main benefits of no code is that you obviously still want a center of excellence, but it allows the business users and the people that are actually using this to go in and build what they would like to build or change what they would like to change to fit the actual day-to-day lives that they're living. And I think that go back to kind of a center of excellence there. It's not that you don't want IT involved with that, because of course when you're establishing integrations or something like that, then maybe this is something that they do need to be involved in. Or you could have someone that is designated administrator that is going in and making changes for people. But when you have at least input from the people from the front lines, from the people that are in it every single day. That's what's really valuable when it comes to building out something that's going to work. Hey, I need this field. I want to know this about these people. So you go in and you drag and drop that field onto the screen. That's huge compared to going in and having to know how to code to make that change. So obviously you limit that ability to certain people, but
Hmm.
that doesn't mean that you don't create that committee or whatever you want to call it, center of excellence that does give input and feedback and that constant improvement of usability to
Hmm.
an extent, because that's ultimately how you drive adoption, is to provide something to people that is valuable to them, not just by, hey, you've got this tool, use it if you want to. You want
Hmm.
people to say, hey, I love this, can we do this? And that's where, again, I mean, going like one step further, you when you enable them to provide ideas and insights, and they actually show up in a system, you
Hmm.
know, that's where they start to get other ideas. Hey, can we do this? Can we do that? And then you can really, expand your usage of it to fit all sorts of different things, because it goes back to the business process management piece, is that you can build HR operations in it, you can build training modules in it. So it's those types of things that really kind of enable the broader credit union and all sorts of different teams to put their activities in there as well. So this kind of enables creativity, if you wanted to simplify that.
So I like that you called out you're not going to have tellers creating agents and workflows and things like that. I would agree with that. I think there's probably a business analyst role that are probably ideal because they have the business knowledge about what the internal process is, where data needs to flow, which people need to do what. They may not know how to write SQL, they may not understand JSON or Java or anything like that, but they can certainly drag and drop information and put together a fairly basic workflow that not only mirrors the existing business process, but is also they're smart enough to understand the flow of data and the flow of knowledge and the flow of work. So, yeah, I think I like the way you framed it too. What did you call it? Operational, not operational excellence.
The center of excellence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. I think that's a great way of really kind of framing the group of people that are empowered to look within your organization to find ways to apply things like low code, no code tools to the work they already do.
Yeah. And I mean, to your point there, that the center of excellence is typically made up of, let's say, an IT specialist, and then you have a business analyst. So you have
Yep.
both sides of this,
Hmm.
because maybe the business analyst knows that we need to build let's just call it a branch process that they've heard from the subject matter experts at the branch.
Hmm.
So they can build that, but maybe we're missing a piece of information from core. So back to our earlier conversation, then they may not know how to adjust an integration or connection to add that piece of information, but the IT person does. So you're
Hmm.
basically minimizing the responsibilities of IT to very focused things that you need to do, and they are, much rarer than having to just adjust a process or something like that. So being able to offload some of those IT resources, I'm not going to get into that, but I mean, it indirectly opens them up to, addressing some other tech debt they may have. So that may have nothing to do with a CRM or whatever it is. So I think there's lots of benefits to being able to empower the business users to have input and actually go in and change some of these things for what they need.
Absolutely. So thinking about your engagements with credit unions over the last few years, and you certainly don't need to name individual credit unions, but if there's a credit union that you would sort of hold up as a model client, a credit union that came to you guys ready to go right out of the box, and our super users are using, they're your perfect reference client. What's one thing that they're doing that you wish other clients can or would do before they pick up the phone to have that conversation with you in preparation for the next steps?
I think that it is, I'll go back to somewhat of an earlier answer as well. Understanding where they want to focus, understanding what the scope is. That doesn't mean that that can't change or, let's say, expand, because hey, maybe they learned something that we could do that they didn't know previously. That's totally fine. But I think having an idea of what they're looking for, I think is very important. So talking to the different business lines. Sometimes, to give an example, sometimes we have talked to credit unions that do commercial lending, consumer lending, and in mortgage lending, and then only one business line is aware that of that, because they heard, they were a little bit louder and they say, hey, we need something like Creatio here, and then the commercial side says, hey, well, we do too, right? So I think just maybe establishing that, I don't want to call it a committee because it's a little bit less formal than that, but establishing those leaders of the different business lines to understand what do you guys need? Because when we're looking at an enterprise technology and solution, it is going to touch all these different areas: marketing, commercial lending, sales. All those different things are involved, call centers. So I think that really figuring out where we can help is big. And of course, we would help to do that. That's what we want. That's what we're there for, is to assist with identifying those things. But I think understanding where the needs are helps to have a little bit more valuable discussion from the beginning, as opposed to, hey, tell us what, about what Creatio does or something like that.
Mm-hmm. How effective have you been? Let me rephrase that. Are you finding it's difficult to get out in front of credit unions? I became aware of Creatio because I was at a very small conference in Michigan, no, Ohio, in February, and I met some of the folks from Creatio there, and that is really how I came across Creatio. Are you having a hard time getting in front of credit unions? Or are you, where do you see the challenges in engaging with more credit union clients in the future?
Uh, I don't find that it's difficult to get in front of them, because I think that it is starting to become more common, and credit unions are now recognizing the need for something like this. Because, as you said, member relationships are the priority for credit unions. And I think that, unfortunately, if banks have more resources than they can, in the past, they've had more to invest into something like a CRM. So, but when realistically, that's what credit unions are all about in general. So I think that they're starting to kind of recognize that, hey, this is more than just, like you said, a sales pipeline and marketing tool. This is actually benefiting the members and the service aspect of that too. So I think that there's much more interest now,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that, we obviously are in a market with some very, very, very large players, which have the name recognition that we don't necessarily have yet. So a lot of what I do is really try to get the word out. I mean, whether that is conferences, whether that is talking to people, things like this too. So I think it's one thing that we are certainly working on, but we did grow significantly last year in the financial services space. It was 60% year over year.
And you
And
have your own conference.
yeah, and then and exactly in our own conference, which was very, very large this year too. We just got done with it actually a couple weeks ago. And yeah, so I mean, I think just getting out and really talking to people and understanding that the Creatio, many, many, many times, I would say 90% of the time, fits better than something that some of the larger players offer, because we are focused on the 500 million to the 20 billion credit unions, as opposed to these much larger solutions that are, much more expensive, and so on and so forth. So I think that's one of the main the value drivers there. The interest that we get is because we are obviously more affordable
Mm-hmm.
and can do
Yep.
everything that those people are doing too. So yeah, so it's been interesting and it's been great. So we're still working on it.
Well, this was great, Chris. Like I said, this was the second one I've done so far with this CRM topic, and we've got one more to do. And I'm really looking forward to the roundtable with all of you guys on the call, because I did not design it this way, but it sort of worked out so that, the first one was very sales and marketing automation focused. The second one is a bit more service focused. And the third one is a little bit of a wild card for me. So I'm really looking forward to that battle royale that we're going to set up in a couple of weeks, whatever that looks like. I toyed around with the idea of making this sort of a relaxed, everybody is sipping on a brandy or whiskey or something like that. But then I thought about it and I said, after 30 minutes or so, that might not go well. We've got a bunch of competitors sitting around the table having some drinks and conversations. We may have to use the bleep button a couple of times on that one.
You can't say it wouldn't be interesting though.
Absolutely. Maybe we'll toy around with that. Maybe we'll workshop that one a little bit and we'll record it and see what happens. If it's safe, we'll release it. If not, we'll do it again and we'll make it a PG-13 or a PG rating instead. So, but this was awesome. This was great. This is, I love the conversation. I love the information. I really think Creatio's got an interesting solution. I love the pedigree in the BPM world. I'm a process nerd. I love process. I'm Six Sigma certified, so I love being efficient. So again, this was great. We're gonna, we'll get together again in a couple of weeks with some of our other friends. But I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been great, and just enjoy talking to you
Absolutely.
too. Looking forward to it.
100%. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it.